My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for 32 years, I lived under the shadow of a family that never saw me. 3 weeks ago, after my parents died, my older brother threw me out. Just like that. He stood there in the doorway of the house where we both grew up, looked me straight in the eyes, and said the words that still echo in my mind every single night. Dad made his decision years ago, Sarah. The sons get everything. The daughters, well, daughters get what they deserve. Nothing. He actually smirked when he said it. Can you believe that? Our parents weren't even cold in their graves yet, and he was already erasing me from the only home I'd ever known. 2 days later, I came back from my shift at the nursing home, exhausted down to my bones, and my key wouldn't turn in the lock. I stood there confused, trying it again and again, thinking maybe the cold had jammed something. But no. He'd changed the locks. My own brother had locked me out of my childhood home. I walked around to the garage, and that's when I saw them. All my belongings, everything I owned in this world, thrown into soggy cardboard boxes. It had rained that afternoon and half my stuff was ruined. My nursing diploma, the one I worked 3 jobs to earn, was warped and water-stained. Mom's recipe box, the one she'd pressed into my hands during her final months, was sitting there getting destroyed. And through the window I could see her. Jessica, my brother's wife, walking through our family living room with a glass of wine, laughing at something on her phone. She looked up, saw me standing there in the rain staring at my ruined life, and you know what she did? She smiled, raised her glass in a little toast, and walked away. I need you to do something for me right now. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. Because what happened next? What my mother had been planning in secret for 8 long years. It changed everything. But to understand how a worthless daughter ended up with everything, you need to know how we got here. Let me take you back. My father, Richard Mitchell, wasn't a bad man. Not in the obvious ways. He never hit us, never screamed, never threw things. But he had this belief, buried so deep in his bones it might as well have been part of his DNA. Sons carry the legacy forward. Daughters? Well, daughters are temporary. They marry, they take someone else's name, they disappear. He built a decent contracting business in our Connecticut town. 4-bedroom house, nice neighborhood, the kind of place where people mowed their lawns every Saturday. He had a workshop in the garage where he'd spend entire weekends with my brother Daniel, teaching him how to build cabinets, how to read blueprints, how to become a man. I'd watch them sometimes from the kitchen window while I helped Mom prepare dinner. Daniel was 6 years older than me, and in Dad's eyes, he hung the moon. My mother, Grace, oh my sweet mother. She kept a rose garden in the backyard that she tended every single morning before the sun got too hot. She had this way of smoothing over Dad's rough edges, of making his dismissals feel less like rejection and more like just the way things were. I didn't realize until much later what that cost her. Daniel soaked up every drop of Dad's attention like a sponge. When he graduated high school, Dad paid for his business degree at a private university. $40,000 a year, no questions asked. When Daniel wanted to break into real estate, Dad opened every door he could find, made every introduction, handed him success on a silver platter. When I told Dad I wanted to go to nursing school, he looked at me like I'd suggested flying to Mars. Girls don't need expensive education, Sarah. You'll just get married and waste it all anyway. So I got scholarships. I worked double shifts at a diner where the grease smell never quite washed out of my hair. I paid every single penny myself. And I remember it so clearly. It was 8 years ago now. Mom pulled me aside one evening after another family dinner where Dad spent an hour praising Daniel's first property sale, while barely acknowledging that I'd been accepted into my program. She took my hand, squeezed it so tight it almost hurt, and whispered, "I've taken care of you, sweetheart. You won't understand now. But I have." I thought she just meant emotionally. You know, mother's love, that sort of thing. I had no idea that same afternoon, she'd been sitting in a lawyer's office, signing papers that would one day shift the entire world beneath our feet. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Like no matter what you did, you'd never be enough just because of who you were born as? Drop a comment if this is hitting close to home, because what comes next gets even deeper. 2 years ago, everything changed. Mom was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. I'll never forget that phone call. I was in the middle of my shift at Riverside Senior Care when Dad's number flashed on my screen. He never called me. Ever. Your mother's sick, he said, his voice flat. You need to come home. Not we need you. Just you need to come home. Like it was my job. Like it had always been my job and I'd been foolish to think otherwise. I moved back home within 5 days. I switched to night shifts so I could be there during the day when Mom needed me most. Chemotherapy appointments every week, radiation sessions, the nausea, the weakness, watching cancer try to steal the strongest woman I'd ever known. My paycheck dropped by nearly a quarter, but I didn't care. Not even for a second. This was my mother. The woman who'd sung me to sleep every night until I was 10. The woman who'd sat with me through every heartbreak, every failure, every moment I felt too small for this world. Daniel visited 3 times in 2 whole years. 3 times. Each visit lasted less than an hour. He'd show up in his fancy suits, kiss Mom's forehead, check his expensive watch and leave. Said he had clients, meetings, important things to attend to. Jessica, his wife, came exactly once. Spent the entire visit taking photos of our house for her social media. Memories, she called them. She barely looked at Mom. Barely said 10 words to her. Dad never once acknowledged what I was doing. To him, this was simply what daughters did. It was natural, expected, like breathing. But Mom knew. Oh, she knew. She started going somewhere once a month. Insurance paperwork, she told me. Just boring legal stuff. I'd drive her to this office building in Hartford, wait in the car, and drive her home an hour later. She always seemed lighter afterward. Like she'd set down something heavy she'd been carrying for too long. I didn't understand then. I thought maybe it was just a break from the sickness, from the fear. One night, after I'd helped her into bed and pulled the blankets up to her chin, she took my hand and held it against her cheek. You're such a good girl, Sarah, she whispered, her voice thin and tired. Whatever happens, baby, remember that you did everything right. You showed up. That matters more than anyone knows. I thought she was talking about the cancer. About treatment. About survival. She wasn't. She was talking about the reckoning that was coming. The one she'd been building in secret for 8 long years while everyone else thought she was just a quiet housewife who knew her place. But here's what you need to understand about my brother and his wife before we go any further. Because what they were hiding, what they were desperate for, it explains everything that came after. What Daniel and Jessica were hiding would make everything that happened next feel like justice. But first I had to lose everything. Or at least I had to think I did. Stay with me because the truth my mother left behind is going to blow your mind. Let me tell you about Daniel and Jessica Mitchell. They lived in a massive house in Westchester, 5 bedrooms in a neighborhood where even the sidewalks looked expensive. Jessica called herself an influencer, which basically meant she spent her days attending art gallery openings and posting photos of her designer handbags online. She looked at me the way you'd look at something stuck to the bottom of your shoe. Actually, no, that's not quite right. She looked through me, like I wasn't even there. Like I was furniture. Help. Someone who existed only to serve. I remember Thanksgiving 2 years ago, the last one where Mom was still strong enough to cook. We were all sitting around the table, and Jessica turned to me with this smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sarah, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Have you ever thought about doing something with more potential? I mean, you can't change bedpans forever, right? Mom's hand tightened around her fork so hard her knuckles went white. I'm a registered nurse, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. I help people through the hardest times of their lives. Jessica laughed. This delicate little tinkling laugh like wind chimes. Oh, of course you do. How noble. But the moment that really stayed with me happened later that night. I'd gone to the kitchen to get water, and I heard them in the hallway. Daniel and Jessica, their voices low but not quite quiet enough. Don't worry about her, Daniel was saying. Dad already promised me everything years ago. She's not getting a dime. She's just here playing nurse until Mom dies. Then she can crawl back to whatever pathetic life she has. Good, Jessica whispered back, and there was something desperate in her voice. Something raw. We need this, Daniel. We really, really need this. I stood there frozen behind the kitchen door, my water glass shaking in my hand. The desperation in her voice didn't match the designer clothes, the luxury lifestyle, the casual cruelty. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. I went back to bed and tried to forget what I'd heard. Tried to tell myself it didn't matter what they thought, what they wanted. I was there for Mom. That was all that mattered. I had no idea how much that conversation would explain later. 6 weeks ago, the miracle happened. Mom was declared cancer-free. I sobbed in the oncologist's office right there in front of everyone. 2 years of watching her fight, watching her suffer, watching her refuse to give up, and she'd won. She'd actually won. We went to her favorite cafe for lunch, and she ordered champagne for the first time since her diagnosis. Her eyes were bright, really bright, for the first time in so long. "I want to visit my mother," she said, meaning Grandma Rose, who lived in an assisted living facility about 2 hours away. "Your father keeps saying he'll take me. Maybe now he will." For weeks ago they finally went. Dad drove, Mom in the passenger seat, probably excited to share her good news with Grandma Rose in person. They never made it. A truck driver fell asleep on the highway. The police said it was instantaneous. They said neither of them felt any pain. Didn't even know what was happening. I don't know if that's true. I think maybe they just say that to make it easier. I was working the night shift when I got the call. I remember everything about that moment with crystal clarity. The fluorescent lights humming overhead. The smell of antiseptic. The way my phone buzzed against my hip. And something in my chest knew before I even looked at the screen. Connecticut State Police. I walked to the stairwell because I couldn't breathe anywhere else. Sat down on those cold concrete steps, my phone on the floor where it slipped from my hands, the officer still talking on the other end, asking if I was okay. Asking if someone could come be with me. I don't remember what I said. Don't remember driving home in the dark. But I remember pulling into the driveway at 3 in the morning and smelling Mom's roses, and thinking she'd never tend them again. Never water them in the early morning. Never cut fresh blooms for the kitchen table. The funeral was 4 days later. St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, the same place my parents got married 35 years ago. About 80 people came to say goodbye. Daniel gave the eulogy. He talked about Dad for 8 minutes straight. Mentioned Mom's name twice. And before the reception even ended, while I was still accepting condolences from people who remembered my mother better than my own brother seemed to, Daniel pulled me aside into a small hallway. "We need to talk," he said, his hand gripping my elbow. "About the house. I need to pause here because I'm getting emotional just telling you this. Have you ever had someone show their true colors at the worst possible moment? When you're at your lowest and they just kick you harder? Let me know in the comments, because what Daniel did next, it was beyond anything I could have imagined. The funeral flowers were still fresh when Daniel told me I no longer had a home. "You need to have your things out by the end of the week," he said. We were standing in the church vestibule, stained glass casting colored shadows across his face. "The house is mine now. Dad made that clear years ago." I stared at him. I was wearing the black dress Mom had helped me pick out for another funeral 2 years ago. There was still a crumpled tissue in my sleeve from crying during the service. "Daniel," I said, my voice barely working, "we haven't even read the will yet. The will is just a formality." He adjusted his tie, expensive silk, I noticed. "You know how Dad felt. Sons inherit. That's how it works. You should be grateful I'm giving you a whole week." Grateful. The word felt like a slap. "Look," he said, softening his voice into something that might have sounded reasonable to anyone who didn't know him. "I understand this is hard. You've been living there, taking care of things, but that was your choice. You could have built a real career, had a real life. Instead you chose to play nurse. That's not my problem." Behind him, Jessica was scrolling through her phone, already bored with the whole situation. "Daniel," I said, my voice shaking, "I took care of Mom for 2 years while you what?" His eyes went cold. "While I built something. While I made something of myself. Don't pretend wiping up after sick people is the same as running a business, Sarah. We both know what you really are." He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs. "1 week," he said. "Then I'm changing the locks." I watched him walk back to Jessica. Watched her lean in and smile at something he whispered. Watched them leave the church without saying goodbye to anyone else. That was Monday. He didn't even wait a week. Wednesday evening, just 2 days after we buried our parents, I came home from work at 7. I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with my shift. Grief does that. Makes everything feel like you're moving underwater. My key didn't work. I tried again, confused, thinking maybe something was wrong with the lock. But no. He changed it. The deadbolt too. Both of them. I walked around to the garage, and that's where I found everything. My clothes, my books, Mom's recipe box that she pressed into my hands and made me promise to keep. Everything I owned, thrown into soggy cardboard boxes stacked against the garage wall. It had rained that afternoon. 2 of the boxes had gotten soaked through. My nursing diploma was warped and ruined. Photos from my childhood destroyed. And through the living room window I could see Jessica, walking through my childhood home with a glass of red wine, laughing at something on her phone. She looked up and saw me standing there in the rain, staring at my destroyed life. She smiled. Actually smiled. Lifted her wine glass in a little toast. Then she walked away. I called Daniel. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial. He answered on the second ring. Like he'd been waiting. "The house is legally mine," he said, not even pretending to sound sorry. "I had my lawyer verify everything. Dad's estate, Dad's house, Dad's decision. You have 24 hours to get your stuff off the property before I have it hauled away." "Daniel," I said, my voice breaking. "I grew up there. And now you don't live there anymore. That's how life works, Sarah. Maybe if you'd made something of yourself, you wouldn't be standing in the rain right now like some homeless charity case." He hung up. I sat down on the wet grass next to my ruined belongings and just sat there. Numb. Empty. Destroyed. That's when I found it. Mom's letter. It was in a box of her things, items Daniel must have assumed were worthless. Her gardening gloves, a few old photos, and a cream-colored envelope with my name written in her shaky handwriting. For Sarah. When the time comes. I didn't open it there on that lawn. I couldn't. Instead, I called the only person I could think of. Margaret Chun, the head nurse at Riverside, who'd been like a second mother to me for 3 years. She showed up in her beat-up Honda within 20 minutes. "Get in," she said, not asking questions. "You're staying with me. Tonight and tomorrow and as long as you need." Her apartment was tiny. 2 bedrooms in a Hartford building that had seen better days. But it was warm and dry, and when she handed me tea and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, I finally let myself fall apart. Later, when I could breathe again, I opened Mom's letter. Her handwriting was shaky. She must have written it during chemo when her hands wouldn't stop trembling. "My darling Sarah, if you're reading this, then what I feared has happened. Your father and your brother have shown you exactly who they are. I want you to know I saw it. I always saw it. I couldn't change your father. God knows I tried. But I could protect you. Contact Helen Jong at Morrison & Partners in Hartford. She has everything you need. All the papers, all the arrangements, everything I couldn't give you while I was alive. You are not worthless. You never were. You are the best thing I ever did. I love you more than roses and sunshine and every beautiful thing. Mom." I read it 3 times before my brain could process the words. Then I called the number she'd written at the bottom. What my mother had arranged in secret, what she'd been building for 8 years while everyone thought she was just a quiet housewife. It was about to turn everything upside down. The will reading was in 3 days. And Daniel had no idea what was coming. Morrison & Partners occupied an old brownstone in downtown Hartford. The kind of building with brass nameplates and hardwood floors that creaked with history. I felt completely out of place in my clean scrubs, but the assistant just smiled warmly and led me to a corner office filled with law books and soft afternoon light. Helen Jong was not what I expected. Maybe late 50s, silver hair in an elegant twist, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. But her eyes were kind when she shook my hand. "Sarah," she said, "I've been waiting for your call. Your mother talked about you constantly. That almost broke me right there. She left me a letter. Said you had papers." Helen gestured to a chair. "I do. Your mother and I worked together for 8 years, Sarah. She was one of the most strategic people I've ever represented. 8 years. That was the same time Mom had squeezed my hand and told me she'd taken care of me. Your mother knew your father's intentions," Helen said carefully. "She knew Daniel would inherit everything your father controlled. And she couldn't change that. She couldn't change him. But she could plan around it." "What does that mean?" Helen folded her hands on her desk. "It means your mother made arrangements that exist entirely outside your father's estate. Arrangements that Daniel doesn't know about. That your father never knew about. The room felt smaller suddenly. What kind of arrangements? The kind you'll learn about at the formal will reading next week. Both your parents' wills need to be read together. She paused. But I want you to trust me until then. Can you do that? Why are you telling me this? Her smile was gentle. Because your mother is about to have the last word. And I need you to be ready. 3 days before the will reading, Daniel called. It was late, almost 10 at night. I was sitting in Margaret's kitchen, trying to read a book and absorbing nothing. His name on my phone screen made my stomach drop. Sarah. His voice was friendly, warm even, which somehow felt worse than anger. I've been thinking. This whole situation with us being at odds, it's not good for anyone. You threw me out 2 days after the funeral, Daniel. I know. He actually sounded apologetic. I could have handled it better. That's why I'm calling. I want to make this right. I waited. I've drawn up a simple agreement, he continued. You sign away any claim to contest the estate, and in exchange I give you $15,000 cash. Enough to get yourself set up somewhere nice, start fresh. $15,000. For a lifetime of being told I was less than. For 2 years of caring for our mother while he visited 3 times. For every dismissal, every moment I was made to feel like I was taking up space that should have belonged to someone worthier. No, I said. Sarah, be reasonable. His voice hardened slightly. You're not going to win anything in probate. Dad's will is crystal clear. All you'll do is waste money on lawyers and drag this out. Take the money. Start over. No, Daniel. I'll see you at the will reading. His voice turned to ice. You're making a huge mistake. You know that, right? You're going to walk out of that room with nothing. Less than nothing. And you'll wish you'd taken my offer. Then that's my choice. Fine. He practically hissed the word. But remember, I tried to be generous. What happens next is on you. The line went dead. I set down my phone with shaking hands. Then I did exactly what Helen told me to do. I waited. Can I ask you something? Have you ever been pressured to sign something by family? Told you had no right to ask for what's fair? That specific kind of manipulation, it leaves scars. If this story is hitting close to home, leave a comment. I'm reading every single one. Because what happens at that will reading, it's about to blow everything wide open. The will reading was scheduled for 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon at Morrison & Partners. The conference room had a long mahogany table, expensive leather chairs, and windows that let in cold February light. 6 of us gathered there. Daniel and Jessica. Me. Helen Zhang and her assistant. And to Daniel's visible shock, Grandma Rose. Daniel's confident smile faltered the moment Grandma walked through the door. I didn't know you were coming. Grandma Rose was 81 years old and sharper than people half her age. She wore a navy dress, her silver hair pinned back perfectly, and the sapphire ring she'd worn my entire life glinted on her finger. I was asked to be here, she said simply, taking the seat next to me. By my daughter. Daniel and Jessica exchanged quick glances. Well, Daniel said, recovering his composure. The more the merrier, I suppose. Though I don't see why we need to complicate this. Dad's wishes were very clear. Helen took her place at the head of the table, folders arranged precisely in front of her. Before we begin, I should note we'll be reading 2 wills today. Richard Mitchell's will and Grace Mitchell's will. They are separate documents with separate provisions. 2 wills. Jessica frowned. Why would that matter? Everything was jointly owned. Helen's expression remained perfectly neutral. Not everything, as it turns out. I felt Grandma's hand find mine under the table and squeeze tight. Daniel straightened his watch, that expensive one that probably cost more than my car. Fine. Let's get this over with. Read Dad's will first. Helen opened the first folder. Very well. Last will and testament of Richard Allen Mitchell, dated 14 months ago, witnessed and notarized in Hartford County. The room went silent. This was it. Dad's will was exactly what Daniel expected. Helen read through the standard things: executor appointments, debt payments, funeral arrangements. Then she reached the distribution of assets. To my son, Daniel Richard Mitchell, I leave 70% of my personal assets, including my vehicle, my workshop tools and equipment, and my share of all financial accounts held jointly with my wife. Daniel nodded slowly, satisfaction spreading across his face like oil. To my daughter, Sarah Lynn Mitchell, I leave 30% of my remaining personal assets. 30% of remaining assets, Jessica murmured, doing the math in her head. So after debts and expenses, basically nothing. That's not, I started. It's fine. Daniel cut me off, magnanimous now. Dad's accounts totaled about $90,000. You'll get something, Sarah. Maybe $27,000 after everything's settled. He smiled at me like he was doing me some enormous favor. That's more than I expected Dad to leave you, honestly. Daniel, Grandma said quietly, perhaps you should let the lawyer finish. What's left to finish? He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the backrest like he owned the place. The house was Dad's. The money was Dad's. I'm the primary heir. Sarah gets a consolation prize, which is generous, all things considered. Jessica actually pulled out her phone, probably already planning how to spend her inheritance. Actually, Helen said, her voice cutting through Daniel's satisfaction like a knife, there's quite a bit left to discuss. Richard's will represents only a portion of your parents' combined estate. Combined? Daniel's confidence flickered. What do you mean combined? Helen closed the first folder and opened the second. Your mother's estate is separate and significantly larger than your father's. The room went absolutely still. Daniel stopped smiling. Wait. Daniel held up his hand. Mom didn't have her own estate. She was a housewife. Everything she had came from Dad. That's not accurate, Helen said calmly. It is accurate. Daniel stood up, as if height would give him authority. I know my own family. Whatever you're about to read, whatever little savings account Mom might have had, it doesn't change anything. Dad made his wishes clear for decades. The son inherits. The daughter takes what she's given and is grateful for it. He turned to me, and the venom was back in full force. This is what I was trying to spare you, Sarah. This embarrassment. You're sitting here hoping Mom left you something. What, her jewelry? Her recipe cards? It doesn't matter. The house is still Dad's. The real money is still Dad's. And you're still the same worthless person you've always been. Daniel, Grandma said, her voice low with warning. He ignored her completely. I hope you enjoy being homeless, Sarah, because I made sure you have nothing to fall back on. No home, no family support, nothing. Maybe next time you'll think twice before. Mr. Mitchell. Helen's voice was pure steel. Sit down. The command was so unexpected that Daniel actually obeyed, dropping back into his chair. I understand you have opinions about how your parents' assets should be distributed, Helen continued, her voice measured and cold. But this is a legal proceeding, not a family argument. Your mother's will contain specific provisions that supersede your assumptions. If you interrupt again, I will ask you to leave and you'll receive the information in writing. Jessica grabbed Daniel's arm, whispering something urgent. He sat back, jaw clenched tight. Helen picked up the second folder. And now, she said, we addressed the matter of Grace Mitchell's estate, including the letter she specifically asked me to read aloud. What was in that letter? What had my mother been planning for 8 years while everyone thought she was just a quiet housewife who knew her place? Daniel was about to find out that the woman he'd dismissed his entire life had been the smartest person in the room all along. Stay with me. This is where everything changes. For one terrible moment I doubted everything. Daniel's words echoed in my head. Mom was a housewife. Everything she had came from Dad. What if he was right? What if the letter, the lawyer, all of it was just a mother trying to comfort a daughter she knew would be left behind? I looked down at Mom's watch on my wrist. The Timex with the cracked leather band and scratched face. She could have afforded something nicer. I knew that now. But she wore this one every single day until the day she died. What had she really left me? She probably just has some life insurance or something. Jessica was whispering to Daniel, her manicured nails tapping the table. A few thousand. Nothing that changes our situation. Our situation. The phrase caught my attention. What situation? Grandma's hand squeezed mine under the table, firmer this time. Your mother, she murmured so only I could hear, was the smartest woman I ever raised. Trust her. I looked at Helen, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Patient. Almost anticipatory. I'm ready, I said. Daniel snorted. ready for disappointment. Jessica laughed. Helen ignored them both. She opened the folder and removed several documents. I could see official seals, notarized stamps, pages dense with legal text. Last will and testament of Grace Eleanor Mitchell, she began. Updated 18 months ago, witnessed by myself and a notary public of Hartford County. The testator was evaluated by Dr. Amanda Phillips, a board-certified psychiatrist, and declared fully competent to execute this document. She looked directly at Daniel. Your mother requested I read this letter aloud to everyone present. Daniel shifted. 18 months ago, Mom was in the middle of chemo. Her judgment was compromised. I anticipated that concern, Helen replied evenly. Which is why I have Dr. Phillips' written evaluation confirming your mother's full cognitive capacity. I also have video documentation of the signing itself. She produced a small USB drive and set it on the table. Your mother wanted no ambiguity. She recorded herself explaining every decision. The video is 35 minutes long and available for review if anyone wishes to contest her competency. Victoria's phone had stopped moving. She stared at the USB drive like it might explode. That's... Daniel swallowed. That's very thorough. Your mother was a thorough woman. Helen's lips curved slightly. Now, the letter. She lifted a single page, handwritten on cream-colored stationery. I recognized it. Mom had a box of that expensive paper in her desk, the kind she used only for important things. Helen began to read, and my mother's voice seemed to fill the room. To my children, if you are hearing this letter, then I am gone and the moment I feared has arrived. My throat tightened. I love you both. I want you to know that first. Helen paused, looking up at us. There's more. Shall I continue? Keep reading, Daniel said, his voice tight. Helen nodded. But love does not make me blind. For 35 years, I watched your father favor Daniel in ways he didn't even recognize as favoritism. It was simply how he saw the world. Sons matter. Daughters serve. I couldn't change him. Believe me, I tried. Daniel went very still. When Sarah was born, Richard said, maybe next time we'll have another boy. I held my daughter in my arms and promised her silently that she would never be next time to me. Oh God, I didn't know that. I never knew he'd said that. I watched her grow up working twice as hard for half the acknowledgement. I watched her pay her own way through nursing school while Daniel received every advantage. I watched her come home to care for me during the worst 2 years of my life. Changing my sheets when I was too sick to move. Holding my hand during chemotherapy. Singing me the songs I sang to her as a baby. Tears were streaming down my face now. I couldn't stop them. Daniel visited 3 times. 3 times in 2 years. Jessica made a small strangled sound. I do not write this to condemn my son, but I write it to explain why I made the choices I did. The assets I leave to Sarah are not a reward. They are not favoritism. They are the balance I could not provide while I was alive. They are what she was always owed. Daniel's face had gone pale, almost gray. If Daniel is hearing this and feels angry, I understand. But I ask him to consider, why does he feel entitled to everything? Who taught him that? And what did he do to earn it besides being born male? The silence was crushing. Helen looked up. The letter concludes. Sarah, my darling girl. You are not a burden. You never were. You are my heart. Live well. Be happy. And never let anyone tell you that you don't deserve every good thing. With all my love forever. Mom. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Grandma pressed a tissue into my hand. Now, Helen said quietly, let's discuss what your mother actually left you. First, Helen said, pulling a document from the folder. The house. Daniel straightened immediately. The house is part of Dad's estate. It was always in his name. Actually, it wasn't. Helen slid the document across the table. 6 years ago, your parents executed a deed transfer. The property at 847, Willow Lane was transferred from joint ownership to Grace Mitchell's sole name. What? Daniel grabbed the paper, scanning it frantically. That's... Why would Dad agree to that? For liability protection. Your father was facing a potential lawsuit from a client at the time. Moving the house into your mother's name protected it from any legal claims against his business. It's a common estate planning strategy. I never heard about any lawsuit. It was settled quietly. But the deed transfer remained. Helen produced another document. This is the recorded deed from Hartford County Land Records, dated 6 years ago. The property, currently valued at approximately $700,000, belongs solely to your mother. Jessica's face had gone a strange, sickly color. But that means... It means your mother had full authority to leave it to whomever she chose. Helen looked at me. And she chose you, Sarah. No, this couldn't be real. No, Daniel shook his head violently. No, this has to be a mistake. Dad said he always said. Your father believed what he wanted to believe, Grandma said sharply. Grace told him the deed transfer was temporary, for the lawsuit. She never transferred it back. And he never checked. I stared at the deed, Mom's signature at the bottom, neat and deliberate. The house where I grew up. The house where I'd cared for her. The house Daniel had thrown me out of. It was mine. It had been mine the whole time. Additionally, Helen continued as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb, there is the matter of the irrevocable trust. The what? Daniel looked like he'd been punched. 8 years ago, your mother established an irrevocable trust with Sarah as the sole beneficiary. Once established, such a trust cannot be modified or dissolved without the beneficiary's consent. It exists entirely outside the probate process. 8 years ago. Daniel turned to Grandma, his face twisting. You gave her the money. Grandma didn't flinch. I gave my daughter money that was mine to give. What she did with it was her business. The trust was funded with a $500,000 gift from Mrs. Whitfield, Helen confirmed. Your mother invested it conservatively over the past 8 years. The current value is approximately $1.4 million. Jessica made a sound like all the air had been knocked out of her. 1.4 million, Daniel repeated slowly, like the words didn't make sense. That is correct. And because the trust is irrevocable and was funded entirely with your grandmother's gift, never commingled with marital assets, it was never part of your parents' joint estate. It has always belonged to Sarah. I couldn't process the number. $1.4 million. My mother, who grew her own vegetables and wore a $20 watch, had quietly built me a fortune. This is fraud, Daniel sputtered. Dad didn't know about this. He would never have. Your father's knowledge is irrelevant, Helen said calmly. The trust was legally established with funds that were never his. He had no claim to it. Neither do you. I need to pause here because I can barely see through my tears. Have you ever had someone protect you in ways you didn't even know about? Someone who loved you so much they spent years building you a future in secret? Drop a comment if this is making you emotional too, because there's still one more thing Mom left me. And it's about to destroy Daniel completely. There is one final asset, Helen said. Daniel looked like he might be sick. Jessica's grip on his arm had turned white-knuckled. Your mother held a life insurance policy with Lincoln Financial, valued at $600,000. The beneficiary was designated as. She paused. Sarah Lynn Mitchell. Solely. Mom had life insurance. I didn't know. I hadn't known any of this. She purchased it 13 years ago when you were 17. She paid the premiums from her personal account. Money your grandmother sent her annually as gifts. Your father was never a named beneficiary. But I'm her son, Daniel said, and there was something desperate in his voice now. Something breaking. I'm her firstborn. She can't just leave me nothing. She didn't leave you nothing, Mr. Mitchell. Helen pulled out a final page. Your mother's will specifies that you are to receive her personal effects, photo albums, her jewelry collection, and a letter she wrote specifically for you. Daniel laughed, but it was hollow broken. She leaves Sarah millions and I get a letter. The jewelry collection has meaningful pieces, Helen offered. I don't want her jewelry. Daniel slammed his palm on the table. Jessica jumped. I want what I was promised. I want what I earned. What you earned. The words came out of me before I could stop them, quiet but filling the entire room. You visited Mom 3 times in 2 years, Daniel. 3 times. You told me I was nothing but a burden while I was holding her hand through chemotherapy. What exactly did you earn? He stared at me. I stared back. Let's discuss the total figures. Helen said, and I could hear the faintest satisfaction in her professional tone. This is contested. Daniel stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled. I'm contesting all of it. Mom wasn't in her right mind. The chemo, the medication she couldn't have. As I mentioned, your mother underwent a cognitive evaluation by Dr. Phillips, a board-certified psychiatrist. The evaluation concluded your mother was fully competent. Psychiatrists can be wrong. Additionally, the signing of her will was recorded on video. Helen tapped the USB drive. In it, your mother clearly articulates her reasons for each decision. She also directly addresses the possibility that you might contest, and explains why such a contest would fail. There has to be something. If you wish to contest your father's will, you may, though I'd advise consulting your own counsel about costs versus potential recovery. As for your mother's arrangements, Helen's gaze was level. She anticipated your objections, Mr. Mitchell. She spent 8 years making sure everything was ironclad. And then Daniel collapsed. Right there in the law office. But what he said when he woke up and what Jessica finally admitted about their real situation, that's when I understood just how desperate they really were. And why Mom had been so careful to protect every single dollar from them. Grandma Rose spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. My daughter didn't do this out of spite, Daniel. She did it because she knew. We all knew. Without protection, Sarah would receive nothing. And Sarah deserved better than nothing. Daniel turned to Grandma. His face contorted with rage and disbelief. You helped her hide this. You helped her cut me out. I helped her protect her daughter, Grandma said simply. The same thing any mother would do. Daniel had no answer to that. Victoria broke first. This is insane. She stood up, her careful composure finally shattering. She's a nurse. She changes bedpans for old people. And she gets $2 million While you what, Mrs. Mitchell? Helen asked mildly. Victoria's mouth opened and closed. She'd said too much and she knew it. While you're about to lose your house in Westchester, Grandma said quietly, but her voice cut through the room like a blade. Did you think we didn't know about Daniel's failed investments? The $500,000 loss? The foreclosure notices? Daniel went white as a sheet. How did you? He couldn't finish the sentence. Grace knew, Grandma said. She knew about the debts, the bad deals, the desperation. She knew you were counting on this inheritance to bail you out. That's why she made sure you couldn't touch what she'd built for Sarah. I looked at my brother, really looked at him for the first time in years. The expensive watch, the designer suit, the luxury car in the parking lot. All of it was a facade, I realized. Scaffolding built on credit and promises and the assumption that our parents' money would always be there to catch him when he fell. You were planning to take everything, I said slowly, the pieces falling into place. Not because you needed it to survive. Because you were drowning. I'm not drowning, Daniel snapped, but his voice cracked. I had a setback. That's all. A temporary setback that Dad's estate would have saved you, I finished. Except the estate wasn't what you thought it was. Jessica sank back into her chair. Mascara starting to streak down her face. You spent your whole life being told you deserved everything, I said, my voice steady now. And you never once stopped to wonder if that was actually true. Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't. Helen waited until the room was quiet again. For the record, she said, let me summarize the total assets passing to Sarah Mitchell. She consulted her notes, though I suspected she knew every number by heart. From her mother's estate, the property at 847 Willow Lane, estimated value $700,000. From the irrevocable trust established in 2018, $1,400,000. From the Lincoln Financial Life Insurance Policy, $600,000. She looked up. Additionally, from her father's estate, 30% of remaining liquid assets, approximately $27,000. Victoria's breathing had gone shallow. The total, Helen continued, her voice measured and professional, is approximately $2.727 million. The number hung in the air like something physical. $2.7 million. My mother, who grew vegetables and wore a Timex watch and never bought anything she didn't need, had left me nearly $3 million. Daniel made a strange strangled sound. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles bone white, his face the color of old paper. He tried to stand, maybe to protest, maybe to leave. And then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed. His head caught the edge of the table on the way down. Victoria screamed. Helen's assistant was already moving, calling 911, checking his pulse. I sat frozen, watching my brother unconscious on the carpet, brought down by numbers on a page. "He's breathing," the assistant reported. "Pulse is steady. Probably just fainted." Grandma squeezed my hand. "Your mother would be proud of you," she said softly. "Not for the money. For who you've become despite all of it." I couldn't answer. I was still trying to understand what had just happened. The paramedics said it was vasovagal syncope, a sudden drop in blood pressure triggered by extreme stress. Nothing dangerous, just his body's way of shutting down when his mind couldn't process reality anymore. They bandaged the small cut on his forehead and recommended he see his doctor. He refused transport. 20 minutes after collapsing, Daniel was back in his chair, pale and shaking, Victoria hovering over him like he might shatter into pieces. He looked at me with eyes that were suddenly very old. "You knew," he said hoarsely. "You knew about all of this." "I didn't," I said honestly. "Not until a few days ago. And even then I didn't know how much." "But you suspected." "I knew Mom loved me," I said, keeping my voice even. "That's all I knew for certain." His laugh was bitter and broken. "And I didn't. She didn't love me." "I think she loved you," I said slowly. "I think she loved who you could have been. But she also saw who you chose to become." Victoria's hand tightened on his shoulder. "Daniel, we need to go. We need to figure out." "Figure out what?" His voice cracked completely. "How to pay our mortgage. How to tell the bank we're not getting anything." He looked at me with something that might have been desperation. "Sarah, you have to help me. We're family." The word hung there. Family. 3 visits in 2 years. You're just dead weight. Enjoy being homeless. "Daniel," I said quietly, "you kicked me out of my own home before our mother's flowers had wilted. You told me I was nothing but a burden. You tried to get me to sign away everything for $15,000. I stood up, picking up my bag. "I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen." "You have to understand," Daniel said, his voice rising with panic. I was stressed. The investments, the pressure. I didn't mean half of what I said. "That's not who I really am." "Then who are you, Daniel?" I asked. "Because I've known you for 26 years, and I've never seen any evidence of anyone different." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "I'm not going to let my brother become homeless," I said. "I'm not cruel like that. But I'm also not going to bail you out of decisions you made while treating me like I was worthless." "So what then? You just walk away with millions and I get nothing." "You get exactly what you earned." I looked at him, this man I'd grown up with, who'd held my hand on my first day of school, who'd become someone I barely recognized. "You get the consequences of your choices. The same way I'm finally getting the consequences of mine." Victoria started to speak, but I held up my hand. "If you want to contact me, you can go through Helen. But any personal relationship between us." I paused. "That's going to take time. A lot of time. And honestly, I don't know if we'll ever get there." "Sarah, please." "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said, my voice steady. "I'm doing it because I finally understand something Mom tried to teach me. I don't have to accept treatment I wouldn't give to someone else." I walked toward the door. "Mom loved you," I said over my shoulder. "But she loved me enough to protect me from you. That's the difference." I didn't wait for his response. Grandma followed me out to the hallway. "Wait," she said, catching my arm gently. "I have something for you." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small velvet box, navy blue, worn soft at the corners. "Your mother wanted you to have this. She asked me to give it to you after the reading." Inside was her sapphire ring. The one Grandma had worn for as long as I could remember. The one I'd admired since I was a little girl. "Grandma, I can't. This is yours." "It was mine," she corrected gently. "I gave it to your mother on her wedding day. And she gave it back when she knew she was dying, so I could give it to you when the time was right." I slid it onto my finger. Fit perfectly. "There's something else you should know," Grandma said. "Something your mother didn't put in the will." I looked up, seeing tears in her eyes for the first time. Grace wanted to leave your father. Years ago, before you were born. But then she got pregnant with Daniel and she stayed. She stayed for you kids. I never knew. No one did. She made the best of it. But she always regretted that she couldn't give you a different childhood. Grandma's voice broke slightly. The trust, the insurance, all of it. It was her way of giving you the freedom she never had. The freedom to walk away from people who don't value you. I hugged her tight. This tiny woman who had helped my mother plan for 8 years to give me a future. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me, she said. Just live well. That's all your mother ever wanted. Behind us, I heard Daniel and Victoria finally leaving, their voices low and strained, arguing already. I didn't look back. 1 month later, I sat in the office of a financial advisor in Hartford. Someone Helen had recommended. A woman with 20 years of experience and no interest in getting rich off my inexperience. Here's my recommendation, she said, sliding documents across the desk. We keep the trust invested. Draw only what you need for living expenses. The life insurance goes into high-yield savings for emergencies. We pay off your student loans immediately. That's about $48,000. She looked up at me. And you keep working. Keep working. You love your job, she said simply. Money shouldn't change who you are. It should just give you options. So that's what I did. Paid off my loans. 6 years of debt gone in a single transaction. I kept my position at Riverside, though I switched to day shifts now that I didn't need the night pay anymore. I stayed with Margaret for another month while I figured out what to do about the house. Because the house was complicated. It was where I'd cared for Mom. Where I'd been thrown out like garbage. Where Daniel and Jessica had drunk wine while my belongings soaked in the rain. But it was also where Mom had grown her roses. Where she'd tucked me in at night. Where she'd quietly met with lawyers and built a future I never knew existed. Rent it, Margaret suggested. Let it pay for itself while you figure things out. There's no rush. She was right. For the first time in my life, there was no rush. I had time now. Mom had given me that. 3 months after the will reading, Grandma called with news. Daniel had to sell the Westchester house, she said. And Jessica filed for divorce last week. I was at work on my break, sitting in the same stairwell where I'd learned our parents were dead. Strange how places accumulate moments. How do you know? The listing showed up online. And Jessica's Instagram is very forthcoming. Grandma's tone was dry. She's already rebranding herself as a survivor of financial abuse. Direct quote. I almost laughed. Almost. Is he okay? Define okay, Grandma sighed. He's living in an apartment in Bridgeport. Still working but not at his old firm. I don't think anyone's inviting him to the country club anymore. The version of me from 3 months ago might have felt satisfaction. The new version just felt tired. I don't wish him harm, I said. I know you don't. That's the difference between you and him. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because here's what I learned through all of this. My mother didn't just give me money. She gave me permission to believe I was worth something. To understand that walking away from toxic people isn't cruelty. It's survival. 6 months after the will reading, I enrolled in a nurse practitioner program. It was something I'd wanted for years, the chance to do more, to help patients in deeper ways. But the program was expensive, and before it had seemed like an impossible dream. Now I could afford it. I used money from the trust, following my advisor's plan. Enough for tuition and books, with the rest still growing quietly in the background. I kept working part-time at Riverside because I loved the patients I cared for. Margaret and I found an apartment together near the hospital. 2 bedrooms, a tiny balcony where I started growing roses in pots. Living alone is overrated, she said. Having a roommate means splitting Netflix, I replied. We both knew it was more than that. Grandma called every Sunday. She'd tell me stories about Mom as a child, about who she was before life wore her down. I recorded every call, building an archive of the mother I was still getting to know. And the house on Willow Lane? I rented it to a young family. A nurse from Riverside, actually, and her husband and 2 little girls. The older daughter asked if she could take care of the rose garden. I said yes. I said yes to a lot of things that year. To opportunities. To rest. To the slow process of understanding that I was worth more than I'd been told. I've thought a lot about why Daniel became who he is. Not to excuse him. There's no excuse for how he treated me. But to understand. My brother grew up being told he was special simply because he was born male. He didn't have to prove anything. The world was his by default. So he never developed empathy. Never learned to earn what he had. Never recognized that other people's needs mattered as much as his own. It's called entitlement. The belief that you deserve things without effort. It's not born. It's taught. And once it takes root, it's almost impossible to pull out. Marcus isn't a monster. He's a product of a system that told him he was worth more than he actually was. And when reality caught up, he didn't know how to handle it. I don't know if he'll ever change. I hope he does. But his change isn't my responsibility. My responsibility is to myself. To live the life Mom wanted for me. To set boundaries that protect my peace. To remember that walking away from toxic people isn't cruelty. It's love. Self-love. If you're watching this and you've been told you're not enough by family, by partners, by anyone who should have loved you better, I want you to know something. They were wrong. You were always enough. Sometimes the people who love us protect us in ways we don't see until much later. And sometimes we have to become our own protectors. That's what I learned from my mother. That's what she spent 8 years teaching me without ever saying a word. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me about someone who protected you, or someone you wish had. And if you want more stories like this about standing up for yourself, about finding your worth when everyone told you you had none, hit that subscribe button. Thank you for staying until the very end. Means more than you know. My name is Sarah Mitchell. And this is how a worthless daughter ended up with everything that truly mattered.